It's really important. These issues affecting all of us. So, at our left we have Dr. Shingavi. He's from the department. He's from the Department of English, and he specializes in 20th century literature from India and Pakistan. Oh, I got it right. So welcome, Mr. Here we have Lucian Villaseñor. He was actually part of us here at the retreat, and he's a student activist with the Student Speak. So he's been following these issues since the founding of the Student Speak until now, actually since the beginning of the budget cuts. And I think he got more involved with it when the budget cuts happened with the Mexican American studies and all the ethnic studies and gender studies departments were cut. So he also has a lot of knowledge and he's very passionate about this. So let's learn about it and welcome.
How many of you have gotten your financial aid checks?
It's on its way.
On its way. Anybody surprised at the number when you got your check?
Yes.
It was really big this time, right? You got all the money you were expecting. It's going to help you cover your tuition. I taught summer school this summer, and a student of mine came into my office hours to talk to me about financial aid for the fall semester, and her financial aid check was $13. And my jaw dropped because that's what maybe a book in an English class, right? It's not going to cover your like math textbooks or your chemistry textbooks or anything. That's lunch and dinner maybe, right? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous the kind of situation that this puts us in. Now you contrast that position, the $13 financial aid check, which is kind of an insult more than anything else, right? It's sort of, we're not really helping you out, but we have this sort of fiction that we're helping you out, to the fact that the great governor of the state of Texas is going to be running for president on the fact that Texas is an economic miracle, right? And when every other state in the union is having an economic crisis, Texas somehow is doing really, really well. We're generating jobs and we're growing the economy and all of it. And the fact of the matter is that those two pictures don't fit each other, right? He says that everything is going really, really well here, and yet the fact of the matter is that education is one of the things that they are more than happy to cut every single chance that they get. And this is kind of what has happened over the last 5 or 6 years. It's been this really aggressive plan by the people who run the state of Texas to eliminate all, well, we've never had a high taxation rate in Texas anyway, but whatever taxes do exist, they're attempting to cut slowly and slowly, and the consequence of that has been budget crisis after budget crisis, which then gives them an excuse to cut all the social programs that we care about. Things like healthcare, things like education, things like child protective services, all of those things that actually, make it possible to live a decent life in Texas have all been cut as a consequence of the strategy by largely Republican presidents, but also in many places Republican governors, but also Democrats in certain cities, to reduce the tax rate to make it such that Texas is open for business. The problem with that picture is that certain people are doing really, really well in Texas, right? There are a couple of reality shows that are about to be launched about like sort of rich housewives of Dallas or something like that, right? Where it is possible to live in an extraordinarily filthy rich way in Texas. But for most of us here, it's actually gotten quite worse. I want to give you one statistic which drives this kind of home for me. I graduated from Houston Public School in 1993. Guess what it cost to go to UT for one semester in 1993? What would be ridiculously low?
$1,000.
Not even $1,000. It not even cost $1,000 per semester at UT in 1993. $500 is what it cost. Right? So in the course of basically one adult lifetime, tuition has gone through the roof. 1993 was actually more or less the time they implemented tuition deregulation in Texas, which allowed them to raise tuition whenever they wanted to, however high they wanted to. 2003. Was it 2003? Well, 1993 is when they began the process of increasing tuition or delinking it from public funding. But 2003 is when they officially deregulated and tuition started to go up astronomically. Now, the education that I would have gotten if I had gone to UT in 1993, your education is not 12 times better than my education. You don't get 12 degrees when you graduate, and yet the cost is about 12 times more than what it would have been when I went. And that's sort of the ridiculous nature of what's happened in less than 20 years has been they basically decided that what should be public, available to everyone, really these universities were created to provide Texas citizens access to education that they wouldn't otherwise get, right? I mean, this is a quality school with quality instruction, with quality professors, all of that. It's supposed to be available to the citizens of Texas, and what they basically decided is that because they don't want to spend money on education anymore, they're going to price ordinary people in Texas out of a quality education. That's what's happened in the last 20 years. So a consequence of that, two consequences of that have been felt pretty acutely. One of them is your tuition dollars are going up, and they've been going up the last 20 years. In fact, in the last 20 years, there's not been a single year where tuition hasn't gone up. Which means, more or less you can expect for the next 20 years, unless we do something about it, those tuition dollars are it's going to cost more and more to go here. And secondly has been a kind of transformation of the university from an institution which serves the students to an institution which is now all about making profits. The university is actually a fairly profitable venture when you look at the kinds of things that it does. They make quite a bit of money from the research that they do. I think Lucian's going to show the video of the Office of Commercialization and Licensing, which basically farms out different parts of the university to big corporations in Austin. And essentially we now do the laboratory work for them because they can't afford to have the labs or the research, so it's done by students here and then gets sold to those institutions. We write grants, we develop patents. We sell sports paraphernalia out the wazoo for, the Longhorns. In fact, because there's no major football team in Austin, the Longhorns get, all of that sort of money from the city of Austin goes straight into the athletics program. Essentially what has happened is that you've seen the transformation of this from being primarily about educating people for decent jobs, for being good citizens, into profit-making ventures. This is what normally gets called in sort of the social science literature as the neoliberal university, right? It's a kind of transformation of something that was designed to serve you into something that has very little to do with what benefits students at UT. So you might think about your education in your classes and the number of classes that you've taken where you can tell the professor is racing to get out the door. It's not really about you or your education. You get sort of funneled off to some graduate student who may or may not, have similar kinds of issues as well because they're under the gun trying to work to finish their degree. And it's not really about your education. You're sort of like a cog in the machine at the university. And you might also think about how every aspect of your education is now a commodity, right? You buy your books, you buy your computers, you buy your, even the food. Food used to be sort of free cafeterias, and now it's like, I don't even know if you have access to this just or even have free cafeteria food anymore, right? You buy everything from a fast food joint. The clothes are all pushed on you. The credit cards, how many times you get accosted by the credit card people at the West Mall trying to get you to parking, right? Every aspect of life now is for sale in a way that makes you think that you're not actually there to learn, you're actually there to, it's basically 4-year mall time, right? If you think about what you're doing at the university. And what has basically happened is they've figured out that you need an education to have a decent job in this country, right? You need some sort of college degree to get a decent job, and people are willing to pay for that kind of job security in the hopes that this education will actually deliver that, and for the last 20 years it did. It was possible to graduate from UT, and you could more or less be guaranteed some kind of at least middle-class income or some kind of professional job when you graduated. Now, my guess is that if you ask many of your friends who recently have graduated with liberal arts and social science degrees, I don't know about engineers, if it's tough there, but you will find many of them are now working as baristas, working as waitstaff, working in retail, working in sort of, not exactly the sort of white-collar jobs that you might have aspired to, but something else to try to make it in this economy. The UT degree no longer buys you, it's no longer a passport into middle-class life like it used to be 20 years ago because the economy everywhere is doing quite badly, right? People took major hits on the stock market, people took major hits on the housing market, and the consequence has been that when you graduate, there aren't really those sort of lucrative jobs that we all expected coming out of it. Now, this isn't unique to the United States, it's happening everywhere. So maybe if you've been watching the news, you've seen young people revolting in almost every single country across the world because education is no longer getting you access to the kinds of economic futures that you imagine. So young people are the ones that start the revolution in Tunisia, but it's continuing in a number of other places. The strikes that have happened in Italy, the riots that just took place in London, the protests that are ongoing in Chile, all of these are all connected to a sort of global phenomenon, which is that they've figured out that education can be sold as opposed to something that people have a right to. And the consequences of that are going to be that the world that you will enter into when you graduate from the University of Texas will look very, very different than the one I think that, or the promises that you were told about what that university degree would buy. Now, the things that I kind of want to say about this is that it's a pretty grim picture, but the really sort of exciting thing about it is that for the first time in 20 years, there's actually been a kind of coordinated response to it by young people talking about what they want out of their education and how they think society ought to be organized to deliver it. Now, my guess is that you were not the people who speculated on, the futures markets and securities in, the early part of the 21st century and drove the economy into the toilet, and yet you're now all going to be forced to pay for it, right? With the lack of jobs, the crappy education, the lack of social services that you all have. And the question is, why should you have to pay for it? Why is it the case that every single time the people who are responsible for these things get asked, to pay for it, they say, no taxes on us, we're the job creators, we'll take it out of your pockets instead. The only way that I think that we're going to have a serious shot at challenging any of this is to continue to organize as big and as large kind of student movement as we can against these cuts as they're taking place. I just want to give you sort of one set of examples of what this is concretely meaning at the University of Texas. I teach in the Center for Asian American Studies. Last year we got a 40% cut to the program, which more or less guts the possibility of there ever being an Asian American Studies major at the University of Texas. In the English department, we haven't hired anybody in the last 2-3 years. And they're looking at more sort of cuts to money that's available. Last year in anthropology, they didn't take a single graduate student because of cuts to that department. It really will have consequences in not just sort of the size of the classes, which are all getting bigger, but the quality of the education you're going to receive, the options that you have for the classes that you want to take. And really what it is that you are doing when you're at UT. Are you really here to learn, or are you really here to buy more services from the university in different kinds of ways? Library hours are getting shorter, your access to computer labs are disappearing, the places that you can go to study are smaller and smaller than they used to be. All of these things have kind of really put, I think, the question of what kind of education people want, eat, and deserve into pretty stark relief. I think that the questions are pretty grim in terms of what is happening economically, but I also think that this is one of the first times when we really have an opportunity to do something and make a difference about public education. Rick Perry's running for president is probably the best gift that we ever got. Because there's one thing that we can guarantee if we organize a movement at UT is we can embarrass the crap out of Rick Perry, right? To say, how dare you say that this is what the rest of the country deserves, look at what is happening to students at the University of Texas. But you don't even have to look at it just at a college level. If you've been following sort of what's happening at local high schools and elementary schools and middle schools in Austin, all across Texas, cuts, school closures, all of it. I mean, the sort of possibility that we're going to have an entire generation of people graduating from public schools in Texas with overcrowded classrooms, lack of counselors to get them into college, lack of real sort of testing, training that they would need to pass a standardized test is a really scary thing to think about. I think that we could embarrass the crap out of Rick Perry in the next year. And we've got to figure out how to do it in the most coordinated, visible way possible, because I would like that to be the reason he doesn't get the nomination for president, doesn't get elected, is because there's a student movement at UT that really said, how dare you actually try to capitalize on what you think you're delivering for us when you're not the education. That's just laughable, right? The education president who runs around shooting coyotes with a laser-guided pistol in his jockstrap, right? Whatever the story is. I think that we have some real opportunities here to organize and organize effectively, but the real danger is that if we don't do something, this is going to continue, and it's going to look pretty grim and bad for a lot of people who I think deserve better from both the economy and from the state of Texas. So I look forward to answering your questions or having a conversation about what we can do. But I really do take inspiration from the students in the University of Puerto Rico, for instance, who went on strike all last year to demand financial aid from the university so that they could go to school at their public university. Or 5 years ago it was at UNAM in Mexico City where they went out on strike to demand similar kinds of services from the government. There's a history really of student activism to demand the services that are necessary for quality education. Because if we don't do that, we're guaranteed that the University of Texas will turn into a sort of miniature Ivy League kind of thing, which most of us cannot afford, in which the only education we're offered is vocational training, and not anything which reflects our histories, our culture, the things that would make us fully developed human beings. And I think that it would be a real shame if that was a consequence of the kinds of policies and strategies that the governor and other people are pursuing in the state. So I really do look forward to conversation, and I hope that that does at least give you a sense of the picture and the real kind of urgency to do something about what's happening here. Thanks.